this belief that the world is entirely independent of our minds and objective and unaware of us is the kind of scientific fiction in which we operate, and then the real truth that appears to our perceptions, the truth of our immediate experience, is that the mind is a concentric field of diminishing intensity that can draw events and circumstances far from the ranges of probability. And when the two things come together, the coincidence of it is absolutely excruciating.
So the other day, I was binge watching some of Doug's videos from his channel called Be the Change, and it really got me thinking about like synchronicities and of course the Mandela effect. So I just want to give a quick shout out to his channel, because that day I kind of had been in a funk, but after watching some of his videos I started to feel a lot better. So so much so that I got inspired to make this video. But anyways, this video is gonna talk about synchronicities, the nature of reality and existence, the Mandela effect, and of course Terence McKenna's Timewave zero theory. And I'm actually gonna play a Terence McKenna clip in a little bit that relates to everything that I'm talking about. But like Doug and many other people, I've been experiencing the double, triple, quadruple numbers. It happens mostly with clock timing. Like I'll be busy doing something and I'll just randomly look up at the clock and I'll see 2:22, or I'll wake up out of my sleep at exactly 11:11. So that's a form of synchronicity that's pretty common. I also get a lot of music synchronicities too. I really like that Moneybags talked about his music synchronicity a couple years ago, where the lyrics to a song that he was listening to said, "Someone's knocking at the door," and then instantly someone knocked on his door. Now, my biggest synchronicity I experienced over a decade ago, but it's so unbelievable that I still remember it to this day. I was 13 years old, and me and my family were driving from Colorado to Florida. And during the course of this trip, we stopped at a rest stop, like in the middle of nowhere. And this was out of state. This wasn't even in Colorado. We were out of state. Tell me why at the rest stop I see a girl from my school, way back in Colorado, sitting at the picnic tables. Like a recent friend. The school year had just ended, and so this was like a recent friend. This wasn't like someone that I knew from years and years ago. But yeah, she was just sitting at the picnic table, just there, hanging out. And this is actually someone who I had been friends with. Then we became enemies. Then towards the very end of the school year, we made up. So I did go over and talk to her at the picnic table. So I'm able to verify that it was definitely her. But what are the chances of that? We're talking almost 2,000 miles on a 29-hour road trip out of the state. I never told her we were going on a trip, and she never told me at any point that she was going out of state during the school year. Not only did we happen to run into each other out of state, but this was like some random small rest stop in the middle of nowhere. And me and my family were only at this rest stop for maybe 10 minutes. So if either of our rides had stopped for gas or done anything else, then we probably would have missed each other completely. Like what are the odds of this happening It's probably like 1,000,000 to 1. So it's synchronicities like that that make me believe that there is some kind of higher intelligence behind many of these synchronicities that we're experiencing. But if that's the case, then I still have to wonder, how is it possible? Like, how does it happen? I mean, I get the why, you know, I think it's God trying to get our attention, but in a way that's subtle enough to not cause too much disruption to reality. But my question is, how do synchronicities happen? Like, what's the mechanism, for lack of a better word, behind how everything can be orchestrated in such a precise way across so many probabilities that are spread out? So I think to answer that, we have to figure out what this realm is. So real quick, this is my theory on what this place is, and I'm gonna just piggyback off of the live stream I did on Brian's channel. So bear with me if you've already heard this, but I think that what we call the external world is actually the collective consciousness. And what we call the laws of nature and physics are really laws of consciousness. That's how sophisticated this lower level fractal matrix is. It tricks us all into thinking that consciousness isn't the foundation of everything by labeling different appearances within our consciousness as matter. We just gave it a name. We just called it matter. But matter is really just a way of perceiving different components with consciousness. Now keep in mind the way human language is constructed. Human language is constructed in a way that is very dualistic, but I have to use it to talk and form somewhat coherent sentences. So just know that the words I'm using sometimes makes it sound like I'm talking about something that's taking place in some kind of external world that exists outside of consciousness. But just know that there is no external world that exists somewhere out there that's independent of consciousness, whether we're talking about the collective consciousness or individual consciousness. I mean, your entire life, have you ever had an experience that took place outside of your consciousness? Never. None of us have. But a lot of people think that because there's regularity and consistency in the quote unquote world, that means that it's something totally separate from consciousness. Like they'll say, well, I can't fly or walk through a wall, so it must be matter. But the reason we can't do those things is because consciousness follows different rules that are specific to the frequency that it's at. There is regularity and consistency in consciousness. I mean, it comes from God. It was made by God. So of course there would be regularity and consistency in consciousness down to the smallest detail. So when we dream at night and our consciousness is somewhat at an elevated frequency, then sometimes it is possible for us to fly or walk through walls in our night dreams. I think that we've all been lied to about what dreaming really is in order to cover up the fact that this realm or current reality is not actually physical. Instead, I think it's actually a dream that we merge into when we wake up and merge out of when we sleep and enter different realities. Oh, and just a side note, because I've had comments, I think maybe like 1 or 2 people leave a comment on previous videos I've done on this topic. I'm not talking about solipsism. I'm not saying that I'm the only person that exists because everything is in my dream. I'm saying that this dream realm, aka Earth, is made up of everyone's individual dreaming, and everyone's individual dreaming, that's what forms the collective dreaming. But yeah, the Mandela effect is evidence of the dream-like nature of reality. Um, I think that there are many fractal levels of dreaming that are separated by different frequencies. And don't think when I'm talking about frequencies that I'm going into some woo-woo stuff. Frequency is just a fancy name for the vibration of a wave. A perfect example of this is sound waves. We don't think sound waves are woo-woo. Another example of wave vibration is how our brain wave frequencies switch from alpha to delta waves when we dream at night. But anyway, going off of a fractal model of things, if you zoom in, like if you zoom way out of our teeny tiny individual and collective dream fractals, you can see how it makes sense that up at the very, very top level of the whole fractal, it's God dreaming us into existence. I truly believe that's how we were created, through His consciousness, through His thoughts, or dreaming, or however you want to word it. And they say, as above, so below. That essentially is a reference to the fractal-like nature of reality, that phrase. So just like when you dream at night and every character appears to be an individual person, but really all the characters are actually just dream characters within your dream, it's the same on a higher level of reality. So if this realm is God's dream, then that would make us all dream characters or holographic consciousness fractals within God's mind. So we appear to be separate, but really we're not, because we're all part of the one dreamer. I think God decided to create us through His dreaming in order to experience every imaginable aspect of Himself. But He gave us all free will, so some parts have turned away from God, and that's why it's so messed up here in this specific dream fractal that we call Earth. But I think that there are many fractal levels of God's dream, and I don't want to go too deep into my dream theory just because I don't want this video to be too long, but I'll put a link in the description for a couple of my videos that go into greater detail about it and how it all relates to the Mandela effect. Now, I think this dream theory could explain how so many people could experience so many synchronicities, because instead of there being an infinite number of minds separated from God, living in a separate external world, if there is just the one universal mind that composes all of reality and us, then it would probably be a lot easier to orchestrate synchronicities like it was nothing. I mean, long distances between all the different variables involved in specific synchronicities wouldn't even be an obstacle at all. And coordinating the timing for everything to happen at just the right pace wouldn't be a factor either, since God is consciously aware of everything and everywhere at all times, since existence itself is occurring within His mind, within His consciousness. I mean, we're closer than close. So if the structure of reality is made up of consciousness because it takes place within God's mind or God's dream, then I think it'd be safe to say that our perception of reality, i.e. consciousness, is fractal in nature. And I should have said this earlier, but let me read you the definition of what a fractal is. Quote, "A fractal is an infinitely self-similar pattern that is statistically similar. In a true fractal, any zoomed portion at any scale resembles the whole. Fractals are holographic and can be seen in all aspects of nature," unquote. The fact that it's seen in all aspects of nature, that is very telling. And that's why a lot of times you'll hear me refer to what we are as holographic consciousness fractals of God. So, and I know I've said this before in other videos, but I'll just say it again real quick for those judgmental people out there. I'm not saying that we are God. I'm saying that we are teeny tiny little holographic consciousness fractals of God residing within God's dream. And a dream itself is made up of nothing but consciousness. So essentially, we reside within God's consciousness, if that makes sense. This is a visual representation of the layers upon layers of fractals that all make up the one gigantic fractal. And keep in mind too, fractals aren't something that happen independent of consciousness somewhere out there. I think this fractal visual is a good representation of how there are layers upon layers of consciousness within God's mind. You could call it layers of dreaming or different dreams. I think there's multiple levels of consciousness within each person too. As above, so below, right? And I think this fractal tree is a helpful way to show that there are both individual consciousness fractals, which is what we are, and collective fractals, which are composed of the individual fractals, all of which are connected to the one infinitely gigantic consciousness fractal, i.e. God. Now, when we're talking about consciousness, I think each level of the collective fractal contains a different framework of thought or paradigm. Now, by itself, an individual fractal holds a specific worldview, mental construct, or narrative of the apparent world. And ultimately, the different layers or levels of consciousness within ourselves are not something that exists independent of God. I mean, how could they exist separately when we're all holographic consciousness fractals within the one gigantic consciousness fractal or consciousness, which is God? So, fractal patterns definitely aren't limited to only things that we can see with our human eyes. Time, which doesn't exist independent of consciousness, time functions as a fractal too. Terence Mckenna actually formulated a theory about the nature of time based on fractal patterns. He called his theory the Timewave zero theory. Now, granted, McKenna thought that the acceleration in novelty would reach its climax in 2012. I still think there is something to be gained from his Timewave zero theory. And I know that on a more absolute level, time is an illusion. But if we define time as the rate of change or novelty, then his time wave theory does make sense.
Can you explain briefly again what you mean by the end of time?
Well, simply this asymptotic explosion of novelty. In other words, What is it like when you have more change in a single day than you used to have in 1,000 years? It's as though we're falling into a black hole, not of gravitational compression, but of novelty. And it's what has called us forth out of animal organization. It's what has put these enormous technical tools in our hands. It's what shapes our dreams. It's what's calling us home. It's why I believe that in less than 100 years, this planet will be, from the human point of view, empty. I mean, the thing, whatever it is, will have come and gone. The novelty, and I suspect what it is it's actually some kind of other dimension. It's the way I think of it is novelty is crowding into three-dimensional space-time, and crowding in. What happens in 2012, December 2012, is the three-dimensional space-time continuum will be unable to contain any more novelty, and like water flowing out of an overfilled bucket, the novelty will actually begin to push into another dimension. It will actually force into existence another ontological dimension to reality that will contain it. And we call this true pure spirit, or the coming of Maitreya, or the end of the world, or human languages are utterly inadequate to this. And we're not causing it. We can't understand it. We are like corks on the cosmic ocean being carried toward what is essentially the climax of physics in three-dimensional space-time. But here's how this theory works. Here's the kind of universe this theory says we're living in. It says that the universe is approximately 72 billion years old. That's a lot older than orthodox astrophysics says. They're fighting over whether it's 9 to 14. This theory says it's 72 billion years old. That's the first cycle of its unfolding. 1/64th of the way from the end of that cycle, it enters another cycle. That cycle is 1.3 billion years long. It's another level of concrescence, and I take it to be the domain of life. That's about the amount of time life has been around. Well, the next level is 275 million years long. What we're doing each time is we're dividing by 64, nothing complicated. So 72 billion divided by 64 equals 1.3 billion. Divided by 64 equals, I'm guessing, but roughly 275 million. Divided by 64 is, 3 or 4 million. Divided by 64 is 175,000 or something like that. Divided by 64 is 4,306, the domain of history as we know it. The next division is 67 years, the period from the moment of the dropping of the atom bomb on Hiroshima until the solstice of 2012, 67 years. The next cycle is 384 days. It will begin late in 2011. The next cycle is 6 days long. Now understand that in each one of these cycles, as much novelty happens as happened in all the previous cycles. So from 384 days, you go to a cycle 6 days. From that, you go to a cycle 1 hour and 35 minutes long. Then you go to a cycle 1.5 minutes long. Then a cycle 1.3 seconds long. And you just keep doing this, dividing by 64, until you reach the domain of Planck's constant. 6.55 times 10 to the minus 25 erg seconds, technically known as a jiffy, among us professionals. And beyond the realm of the jiffy, there is no need to carry out these divisions because it means nothing. You've reached the grain upon which reality is being printed. So if we have a universe that is undergoing this collapse into hyper-novelty, and it has to start at age 72 billion years and collapse down to 6.55 times 10 to the minus 23rd erg seconds, how much time do you think it has left in its existence when it's halfway through the process? And the answer is an hour and 35 minutes. In other words, what we're saying in this cosmology is that the universe will undergo half of its evolutionary unfolding in the last hour and 35 minutes of its existence. And that's what I mean by the end of the world. I mean that, there will be more novelty jammed into every nanosecond of those last 35 minutes than there previously were in millions of years of cosmic time. And people who say, well, don't you find it rather odd that we're here to witness it, means you didn't understand theory. We're here to witness it because we were called into existence as part of the process. We're here to witness it because if it's happening, we're happening, because we're part of this expression of novelty. We're part of this thing. I mean, it's always been revealing itself, but at ever greater speeds. And, somewhere around 50,000 years ago, if you were paying attention, you would have smelled it in the air. And if you weren't paying attention then, check back at dynastic Egypt. And if you're still too dull to pick it up, check in on the 20th century. And I don't think anybody can miss it now. The air is filled with the eminence of the eschaton. I mean, we are now so dynamically locked with this field of attraction that all you have to do is take a cat nap, smoke a J, lie in a hot tub, and it's waiting just behind your eyelids, just under the surface of ordinary reality. You don't have to look far or move fast to find it waiting. The sense of the eminence of the eschaton is the pervading essence of life in the 20th century.
Now, like I said, McKenna based the climax of the acceleration off the year 2012, but I still think he may have been onto something in terms of this acceleration that we're all experiencing. I mean, we can see this acceleration happening everywhere when we look at all the growing polarities on both an individual level and worldwide level. I think this acceleration may be caused by an acceleration in the thinning of the veil, which is having a direct impact on consciousness itself. Maybe our specific fractal is starting to evolve and merge into a different level of dream reality within God's mind. And to us, it's experienced as a sense of acceleration. I think the Mandela effect may be related to acceleration of the thinning of the veil too. I mean, there's very few things that we've been experiencing that carry more novelty than waking up to the Mandela effect. I mean, it's so novel that a few years ago, none of us could have ever even imagined something called the Mandela effect happening. And maybe the Mandela effect is just one example of a novelty event or series of novelty events that McKenna said would happen as this acceleration continues into what he referred to as the merging of dimensions. I think an acceleration in the thinning of the veil may be related to why so many people woke up to the Mandela effect, and why there's such an acceleration of synchronicities. And like I said earlier, all this acceleration, the Mandela effect, apparent time, synchronicities, it's all happening within consciousness, both collectively and individually. Now, some individual fractals are aware that some kind of change is happening to reality, and some are not aware. And then you have those who are aware yet want to remain in denial. And that's their choice. You know, there will always be those people like that out there. We've seen this with those who have been told about the Mandela effect and shown evidence, but choose to deny the Mandela effect. But as more individuals acknowledge and accept that the veil is thinning and that the Mandela effect is real, the collective consciousness will be impacted more and more, and simultaneously collective reality, or what we call the quote-unquote external world, will start to look more and more dreamlike. Consciousness or existence would not be possible somewhere outside of God. Existence has always been a dream within God's mind, but it's only now that some people are starting to wake up to that fact. Now, the lower collective consciousness that has dominated the collective consciousness of this dream fractal called Earth would love to make this dream a nightmare, because they've chosen to use their free will to ignore God. And that's what they've been busy doing this whole time. We chose to merge into this Earth dream, I believe, from a higher reality fractal of God's dream, in order to influence this dream down here and make it better, make it more loving. Even if it's just refusing to not give in and not become bitter about this place. In your own way, you are helping to make this dream fractal better. Your presence, your consciousness is part of the collective while you're down here, and so the frequency of your consciousness does contribute to the state of the collective consciousness by just your presence. And even though sometimes, it's hard to tell that while we're submerged within this lower level dreaming, it's true. It's only once we're able to raise our vibration that we become consciously aware of how important each one of us is. There's a reason you exist. While we're here, you are not contributing to giving the dominant lower level collective consciousness any fuel. You have a purpose, and you carry it out in your own special way.